I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be talking about the fantastic series Up Here. We are joined today by writers and executive producers Stephen Levenson and Danielle Sanchez-Witzel, along with songwriters and executive producers Kristen Anderson-Lopez and Robert Lopez, director Thomas Kail, and cast members Mae Whitman and Carlos Valdes. And Stephen and Danielle, I wanted to start with a question for the two of you in terms of how you approached creating the narrative structure of this entire series, because I love that we have this couple that meet and there's this immediate kinetic chemistry and connectivity between the two of them from that very first scene. And it's such a dance to kind of figure out the push and the pull between them, because you can't bring them together and kind of pull them apart too many times, because otherwise you'll lose the audience. And yet you need to kind of have this constant conflict as they're going on these internal journeys within themselves to become the versions that they need to be for each other. And so I was really interested in how you kind of found that balance and that dance of the push and the pull throughout the series, because it's so much part of what creates a lot of the energy and chemistry.
Yeah, well, I think, the first thing to say is that really the DNA for this piece is from Bobby and Kristen and from their original stage musical Up Here. So we owe really the whole concept and this whole notion of people struggling with these internal voices to Bobby and Kristen's original idea. And I think that our guiding principle was, strangely putting two people together who should be together was kind of our perverse notion, was that these two people belonged together, except for the fact that everything inside of them was telling them not to be together. We wanted to create a story where the obstacles were internal and psychological and historical. That really, these are two people who, if only they could be honest with each other about who they really are, could really open up to one another, they could have a chance together. But instead, they're so bound by the things that have happened to them, the mistakes that they've made, the wounds that they've suffered, that they can't ever quite bridge that divide. So it's really about people battling with these internal obstacles to try to get to one another.
And I think, from the very beginning, the five of us developing this together, and then when we added a writer's room, it was a lot of therapeutic questions, as writers' rooms often are, of like, how have you screwed things up? What relationships did you mess up? What should have gone well that didn't? What were the dates that failed? What were the moments that failed in your life? Which was a really fun kind of premise to get what you're talking about, which was that push-pull. So we had a lot of fun sharing and, being embarrassed together by how we had screwed up our own lives.
I love that. And Robert and Kristen, in terms of talking about the music, I was really interested in how the two of you found the linear thread of sound throughout this, because when you look at the songs that Lindsay has and that Miguel have, when you start to listen to even just the musical composition and the instruments that you're using, each of them kind of have their own unique identity in terms of the music as characters. And yet when they're together, there's kind of this really great amalgamation of some of the sounds that start to come together into that. And so when you were first composing and writing the music and then, almost like redeveloping it for the series, how did you kind of work to really find what are going to be those linear threads for each of the characters individually? And then when they come together and things are really cohesive between them, what do we want that to sound like from each side?
Well, the great thing about this concept is that it really needs to sing. The whole idea is that inside of us, there's almost like a test in the teapot that is our brain, and it's full of music and huge emotion that we usually don't share, and that sometimes we're not very comfortable with ourselves. So that was sort of the guiding principle behind where did the songs go. And Stephen and Danielle were amazing at finding those spots along with us as we kind of found the story. But we tried to. We had some themes from the original show that we brought in, and the idea of I can never know you. The idea of can I ever know you, or the can you ever really know someone was a really important one. That's the theme that, when Miguel and Lindsay sing together, which are these special moments in the show, and it's not until the very end that they actually sing in the same scene together. It keeps coming back to that, can I really know you?
I would also say that one of the things that we brought our own personal experience and used in this form is the fact that we started dating in 1999, and the music we were listening to in 1999, the Magnolia soundtrack, and all those singer-songwriters, anyone who performed at Lilith Fair, that we actually brought those influences in as we were approaching the score, and we also brought in some of our own struggles. The idea for me of like trying to make sure I'm always telling my own story, that I'm not stepping into a story someone else prescribed me. And Bobby, who has these huge feelings and is hugely romantic inside, but is always trying to play it cool and like be a man on the outside. Like, as Danielle said, we all kind of brought our own things that we're working on and sort of brought them into the songs. Stephen, I know there's Stephen all over these songs, but I would let him tell you where.
That sounds wrong.
Stephen's DNA is everywhere.
Yeah, you needed black light to really find it.
Okay, with the creative. Okay, let's keep it moving.
The thing is,
well, coming over to you, Thomas, I wanted to ask you about how you approached finding the visual aesthetic for the musical numbers, because, like everybody's been talking about so far, it is this very internalized thing. And it feels like the songs early on, when they're still kind of developing themselves internally as characters, are more in a space where it feels very realistic to their imagination. And then as the series progresses and their journeys progress within themselves, you start to really step outside of even being in the same location that they're physically standing in within a scene. And you really are able to kind of like break down the fourth wall a lot more in terms of the visual aesthetics. And so how did you want to grow and evolve the visual dynamics of the musical numbers in line with the journeys that the characters are going on centrally as well?
I mean, who's better than you with your questions, though? Can we just take like 1 second? Well, I feel like you really, you're identifying a lot of the stuff that we thought about. And it's, in a way, it's very simple. When you have a score as varied and robust as this, that's going to dictate where it's going. So content is going to dictate the form. And because they wrote a score where it's completely unified and cohesive, and yet still has all of these distinctions within it, the moment and the story and the character are always in the foreground for the way that all of these writers create and these two actors interpret. So our job collectively was to put our heads together with our other designers and with our DP and our choreographer, and really talk about what the moment needed, because there's opportunity for real expression and explosion in this show, and there's also real intimacy within the number. And so it was really just looking at each of them and making sure that we were not ever doing something that felt like it was in a different show, but also not repeating ourselves. So I think there's there's motif and things that recur, but there's never a visual language that's identical to something that happened, a few songs or a few episodes ago. And that's just because the story really informed us. So we let that be the guiding principle.
And in coming over to you, Mae, one of the things that I love in watching Lindsay's journey throughout the series and this arc is, she herself is the one to say, I really need to change everything in my life. And this is exactly what I wanted to be doing, is to completely shake everything up. And yet when you look at who she is at the end of the series, it still feels completely true to who we met at the beginning of episode 1, even though she was in this place that wasn't right for her and wasn't feeding her creatively. And so how did you go into really finding that very gradual development throughout the series so that you could carry her to this place of really having gone through such a monumental shift and change internally by the end, but making it still feel like the same character we meet at the beginning, because it's not some overnight change. It's something that's a day by day for her.
Yeah, I mean, my answer won't have as many big words in it as Thomas's. Just, I think one thing is like, with a really good project, when it's like written so well, for me, it's always like all about every single tiny little moment really like lining up with the next and making sense and kind of like finding the through line of the truth of every single moment. And I feel like this whole team was always so great with like making sure everything made sense. And that's kind of like my whole concept is I'll do anything if I feel like it's honest or I can understand the reason why it's happening. And I feel like this project, it was pretty easy for me to carry that journey with her, and because the writing was so, it's funny how it's like, it makes a big deal out of tiny moments. And I feel like that's the most fascinating kind of a project. And, the concept of being able to be funny without being mean, the concept of being able to sort of have these like giant heavy themes, but sort of in this really like fun and actually funny way that's somehow not saccharine. Those things to me were something that I was so surprised by in this project. And I felt like I got an immediate sense of who Lindsay was. And that was kind of the most important thing to us, was who are these people and how did they get where they are, and what is inside of them that feels stuck or unexpressed, and where would they ideally be, and like the growth of that. And I think like it just made sense the whole way through, you know, and I think that's a testament to the writing. And it was just exciting to be able to have this space to be able to make that journey honest and know that by the end, the whole change was built on a really solid foundation.
Absolutely. And I mean, Carlos, very similarly as well, you know, with Miguel, he himself is talking about how it's been so long since he's felt okay. And so it feels like he's in such a place of stasis and really not allowing himself to capture his feelings because he has such a fear of that. And so as you kind of go through the episode by episode and scene by scene, how do you kind of play around with finding those moments of, okay, this is where he's going to regress a little bit more back into himself, and this is where he's really going to be able to push himself forward and come outside of his comfort zone and be more expressive within himself?
Yeah, I think for anyone, you know, it's our trauma, it's our pain points that like cause paralysis, I think, in our lives. And obviously Miguel is no exception. And so I think there are particular things or triggers for him, you know, that sort of make him revisit, you know, those moments and that feeling and that pain. And so I think for me, it was just more about finding within the context of these scenes and, you know, the overall story, what these moments are, what they look like, and sort of like, you know, giving it, I don't know, a larger shape, you know what I mean? Just like contextualizing it, not just in the scene, but also in the whole like 8-episode, you know, thing. So.
Yeah, definitely. And coming back to the music a little bit more, Robert and Kristen, you know, from what you were describing before as well, and even just what Thomas was pointing out of like, there's so many different musical stylings and yet it still always feels connected. But I love the way that it kind of gradually builds as well. When you look at the first song that we open with that idea of, can you ever really know someone? Even just the number of different instruments and sounds that we're hearing is a little bit more intimate than the kind of crescendo that we have towards the end, where you've started adding more layers and textures and sounds to it. And so how do you really work on the music composition to find what are the different layers and textures, and how do we want to start gradually bringing in other sounds that represent this growth in our central characters?
One of the things that we both love about musical storytelling is that there are some structural rules, and you almost think of it like architecture. Yeah. So while each episode is its own mini musical with its own theme and its own beginning, middle, and end, then this entire season is also its own musical with an opening number and I want songs and 11 o'clock numbers and a finale. And so that again is sort of the beautiful inherent elegance of musical structure is something that we leaned on and relied on to help us also structure the whole story. And that's why this will be unlike a rom-com streaming series, because we were also bringing in all of this musical theater DNA into the structure, which Stephen, Tommy, Danielle, Bobby, and I all, you know, live and breathe.
One fun thing that we got excited about was the idea that maybe we'd have a main title theme, and we wrote a song called Can I Ever Know You? That then becomes the finale. And it's almost like, you know, that song from Friends, I'll Be There For You, that by the Rembrandts, and there's the short version, you know, from the show, and then there's the expanded version that they played on the radio. We wanted to sort of do that, where we had the song you thought was the main title theme. Then you find out at the end of the show, it's that moment where Mae and Carlos sing right to each other, and there's more of the song, and we're sort of taking a trope from TV and a trope from Broadway and kind of combining them in one moment.
That's so wonderful. And you know, Thomas, Danielle, and Stephen, for the three of you in terms of the writing and the directing of this show, obviously the musical numbers and those elements and that inner world that we have allows you to kind of take places to much larger scopes and spaces. And yet the reason that the show works so well is because it's grounded through these really tiny, intimate moments and details. And, you know, even something as simple as Miguel bringing cupcakes when he's looking for Lindsay at the bookstore and her having had cupcakes when she first came to his office, those little details create these kind of quiet threads throughout between the two of them. And so I was interested for the three of you in how you worked to allow for the larger scope of what the series is able to be through bringing musical theater into it, but really making sure that you always had those tiny details every step of the way.
Well, first of all, you are such a great viewer, so thank you for that.
I know she would get an A+ if she was being graded on this paper. Like A+.
She is, and she just did. Let's be honest.
Yes.
You're going to Princeton.
This interview can count as the book report.
We, you know, from the beginning, we had this notion of wanting to tell an extraordinary story about ordinary people, as we all are ordinary people with extraordinary stories. So that was kind of the dance in our head that we like to imagine, is that this was not a love story between, you know, two larger than life people that as a viewer that I'm watching and going, well, I don't know, I've never been a duke or a duchess, so I'm not, you know, like, it's not that kind of a story. It's about these people that, like, oh, I might imagine myself as that person, and I might imagine myself as that person, and in my head I might feel like a duke, but essentially like we're all kind of toggling, I think, between, you know, our ordinary lives and our ordinary everyday problems, and then the drama and the opera in our heads. And I think a lot of the fun of the show was trying to figure out those moments where the contrast is the most extreme. So, like, you know, in episode 4, there's a moment where Miguel has had this romantic experience with Lindsay, and you know, on the surface, it's kind of just like, it's two people who hooked up, and it's like, that happens every day. That's pretty casual. But for him, it becomes a moment where he sings this incredible, beautiful ballad that turns into this gigantic dance number through space. And it's like, for us, those were our favorite moments. We're finding, like, where on the surface, if we're just looking, it looks like totally banal. But inside, it's never banal. It's always explosive.
And I think the things that we obsess most about just as human beings are the small things. You know, that's what you can't get out of your head, is the little thing. I'm even thinking of the first interview we did today. Oh, I wish I should have said this thing. Oh, I didn't say this thing. It's run through my head 12 times. I'm like, stop, you didn't say it. It's enough already, you know. And it's those things, especially when you're when it's about love, you know, those small moments are the things that you can't get out of your head. I did this, my face looked this way, I brought cupcakes, I didn't bring cupcakes. What was the significance of cupcakes? Oh my God, he thinks I wants to be a girlfriend. He doesn't, like, you know, those things, I think, and as a comedy writer, the smaller the thing, I think the more comedy sometimes you can get out of it, which was a real fun challenge, I think, for all of us in this series.
And for you, Thomas, with the same thing in terms of just finding those visual aspects of kind
of
segueing between the larger spaces and then small details.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the reality is, and everybody on this Zoom, and I try to count myself among them, but I mean this. What Mae was saying is something that Carlos shares and the rest of this group does. If something doesn't feel honest, this group won't put it in. It just doesn't happen. So if there's an idea that's suggestive, we'll always receive it, we'll always listen, we'll always talk about it. But really what we care about ultimately is that the thing that floats to the top and ends up being in the actual show is the thing that felt like it had the most truth to it. So that felt like something that was true in the writer's room, and true when Kristen and Bobby and the writers were all thinking about what that moment can be. And then when it's presented to a company led by Carlos and Mae, they're also going to tell us when something feels authentic and feels honest. So all of a sudden, those little details become the things that make up life. You know, it's that specific, and then that allows it to be universal. So we sort of use those really small moments to explode something. And so much of the show is about feelings that are bigger than the container. So there's this love scene that happens, and it's in a public bathroom, basically. But in our show, the public bathroom can become something so much more expansive. And I think that's what the music allowed us to do, because the story and the characters collided that way. And you have someone like Carlos who can deliver that. So the whole thing just felt like it was infused with a kind of joy in the making of that we want people to receive when they're sitting and checking it out.
Absolutely.
Or standing. They can also watch it standing. I don't want to make it seem like you need to sit.
No instructions and rules.
To add to that a little bit, the fact that when you meet your soulmate, I feel like it sort of holds up a mirror to who you are and heightens everything in your life when you have that moment of like, something is charged about this person. And that's why it is a rom-com of two people who should be together, having to fight their own battles in order to feel ready for each other, really.
And Carlos and Mae, I wanted to ask you both about the nuances of playing these scenes where there's, musical numbers that are existing in their imagination, there's voices talking to them, and yet at the same time, when you're in scenes together, you have to play it in a way where you're allowing the character to acknowledge their inner dialogue, but at the same time, they can't kind of give over too much because the other person in reality otherwise would be like, why are you talking to that person? What's going on? And so there has to, again, kind of be that grounded realism right side by side with the fantastical, and you have to be able to play to both in a very specific way in scenes. And so I was just really fascinated in how the two of you found that balance of how much are they acknowledging this, how much are they responding to it, versus where do they need to just really block it out for the scene to make sense with one another.
Yeah, it's an interesting acting challenge to kind of not just to be mindful of the subtext and have to sort of express that subtext through song and dance, while at the same time like expressing the covering of it all, which is a lot of what we did in those scenes, is just like basically just giving life to both of those realities, the reality that's in our head and the reality of the sort of performance and the safety of editing, so yeah, no, I had a lot of fun doing that, but it came with a set of challenges for sure. It's like I feel like I should have been paid twice, really, because I doing the thing twice and everything.
Get paid for the Zoom too, I think. I honestly copied Carlos a lot, which was exciting. I feel like Carlos has like a very natural way of like emoting vulnerably through song and having it really be, for someone who like doesn't come from a musical background, but I have been acting since I was a child. Like it feels very innate in me, but it's exciting to learn a new way to express it. Like it's a completely new medium for me. And so I think again, because it's vulnerable and it's true, it's like, for me, it was exciting. There was a lot of like fun sort of, as Thomas says, what did you say? Like building the plane as we fly it or whatever. He had all these like little, whatever's that it's still going. But it was very like, we were trying to
laying the track as we drive the train.
Yes, driving, we're flying. We're building.
It was things that rhyme. Okay, I have a very small rhyming dictionary. It's only one page.
So it was fun because, like others have said, it was such a collaborative process. And I think like for me, it's a really special process when you are working with people who are so like good at what they do that they are able to trust the people that they hire to like bring whatever the best thing that they can bring is. And so it felt like it was a real true collaboration in that way, where everybody they were like, hey, we like you and what you do, and we want you to be a part of this and to be a part of this person. And like, so it felt very cool to kind of figure out the relationship with the head characters and sort of when do we look at them? When do we not? When are we here? When is it bigger? When is it not? There was all these little bits and pieces that, because this hasn't really been done before, we were sort of figuring out as we went. And that was really exciting. So I think like, yeah, copied Carlos a lot, ignored Thomas's notes a lot, and pretty much, came up with the best possible answer. I write that down, Thomas. Take those notes.
I really, really love hearing all these details from all of you about how this all came together. I'm so excited for people to see the series. So congratulations on such a great show. And thank you so much for talking about this. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Such clarity.
Thanks again.
Really nice.
Gold star.
Yeah.